Oh boy, how am I gonna do this one? Last time we looked at summarized written text, which was already way too open-ended. I had to give 3 versions of answers using different methods to show you guys a better picture. How the hell am I gonna do that for the essay? Yes, this is our main topic for today. I might have to make more generalizations for this question type and focus more on how to write a beautiful essay efficiently. Efficiency is very important for the PTE essay, so let's talk about how you can achieve that. First, the basics. You will have to address a topic by writing an essay. You will get some specific subject that asks for your opinion, and you'll have to articulate your thought process by writing. By now, you should know that the essay only gives you 20 minutes to write 200 to 300 words, and the fact that you might get 2 essays instead of 1. What a nasty surprise. But if you think about it, that means on average, you will have to type out 10 to 15 words per minute. It doesn't seem as scary when I put it that way, but since in the 20 minutes, you will have to brainstorm, write, and edit a full essay, the time is definitely the biggest challenge. Later on, I will show you guys some simple tips that can greatly improve the process of producing a functional essay. Let's spend some time on the scoring categories first. You have content going from 0 to 3 points, which asks you to properly address the given topic. The form goes from 0 to 2, and to get a 2, you just have to make sure that you're writing proper sentences, and your word count falls between 200 and 300. If you go below 200 or above 300 by a little, you will get a 1, but there really isn't any good excuse for you to disobey that, other than the possibility that you are really slow at typing. In short, you need to get something for content or form. If you're struggling with this, then the upcoming discussions will be completely useless to you because the other scoring categories will just be zeros. Then we have 10 points distributed evenly among the other 5 things: grammar, linguistic range, vocabulary range, spelling, and the last one, which technically is 3 things at once: development, structure, and coherence. We talk about the fact that for summarized written text, you can get away with grammar by using simple structures so long as they are correct, which is also somewhat true for essays. You definitely don't need to overcomplicate stuff like you would when going for an 8 for IELTS. The way for PTE to compensate is to have another scoring category specifically checking for linguistic range. This is a check for the usage of different structures. We briefly talked about prepositions, clauses, and conjunctions in the episodes for summarized written text, and we showed that oftentimes different structures are interchangeable and can deliver the same messages. However, this is not the whole picture. Different structures will tell you how substantial the messages are. It roughly goes like this. Compound sentences and subordinate clauses use conjunctions, and they are probably the most significant. Then are the relative clauses, noun clauses, and appositives. Lastly, you have the prepositions. Basically, you have to demonstrate that you have control over these structures and can correctly determine when to use which. If going after a high writing score, you should probably have a few of each to show that you can use them when they are needed. Of course, it's not like you're trying to complete a collection or anything. If you just happen to miss some of the structures, don't panic and start rewriting the whole thing. Vocabulary is another one that differs with summarized written text. You should try to use some fancy vocabulary in your essay under the condition that you can use them correctly. If you don't know how to use a word appropriately, you might as well just go with a simpler one that can convey the same message. It has an emphasis on the range, but range does not equal complexity per se. If you can properly use a lot of simple words, it's generally better than just using one superfluous word over and over again while it might be used incorrectly. Spelling is, well, getting the spelling correct. If you have more than one mistake, you can kiss these 2 points goodbye, but it's nothing you should worry too much about. If you just occasionally mistype a word or two and later have difficulty to spot them when revising, it's not that big of a deal. However, if you manage to spell paparazzi as pepperoni, that will be catastrophic. Again, at least make sure that your spelling is quite close so the machine won't regard your words as something else entirely. This might hurt your content, so be a little more careful. Lastly, the development, structure, and coherence. Getting a 2 means you have good logic and development throughout your writing, according to the official guide. That's really vague as hell, so the upcoming discussion will be more based on my experience with hundreds of students. This is something that is almost never taught in English classes throughout a Mandarin-based course, but I had the opportunity to attend a high school with a British curriculum. Some of you might have heard of it. It's called the GCE A levels. For the preparation of one of the mandatory exams, I learned how the writing structures work, how logic is shown, and what coherence actually is. Let's start with the structure. The structure is basically a metric to see if individual paragraphs and sentences do their jobs. For example, the first paragraph is the introduction, the last paragraph the conclusion, and you will have a number of body paragraphs that develop your arguments. Structure is, among the three components, relatively easy to understand. Make sure that your paragraphs and sentences serve the right purposes, and you will be fine. Next is development. This is more about interconnections between sentences within a paragraph. The easiest way to show development is by having an elaboration or giving some examples. This is not the limit of how far things can go, and we will have a more detailed discussion later when this comes up. Lastly, we have the coherence. This is a bit like testing if you're wandering off topic. The coherence focuses on whether your entirety of arguments, examples, and elaborations are truly pivoting on the main point. This is something that can be explained better with examples, so we will further expand on this when we go through some essays written by students in future episodes. Phew! It took us a while to go through the scoring categories because there are quite a few. Now that you have a broad idea of what you have to do, let's talk about the time. It can get so stressful sometimes that whether being able to finish the essay in time will affect how well a student does for the second half of the exam. We will have a bunch of tips that can help to alleviate that anxiety. 20 minutes is definitely enough to finish the task. Hell, I did it in 10 minutes, even though that might have cost me 3 points in written discourse, so I can't advertise myself as having achieved an absolutely perfect score. So sad. As we get to the tips and tricks, I will first give you guys 3 mock questions to practice how you can design an essay efficiently. The first will be whether dogs or cats are better pets. The second question will be if you are in favor with public or private schools. The third will be slightly more complicated, asking if you support capital punishment and why or why not. Note how most essay questions give you different sides to choose from. I don't care if you want to go one side or stay neutral, but oftentimes going one side is the easiest approach. Sometimes you are specifically asked to talk about both sides in the prompt. It doesn't mean you have to devote equal lengths to the sides. Take the public versus private school topic as an example. If you are asked to discuss both sides, you can spend one body paragraph talking about how private schools are good and another talking about how public schools are bad. A different approach would be to spend the most of your time praising private schools and just bring up some disadvantages of public schools somewhere in your writing. Both methods work, but the second one, again, is probably simpler between the two. The very first thing to do after starting an essay is to thoroughly read the prompt. When taking the test, your prompts will not be this simple. It is crucial for you to not go off topic. Here's an example from the official practice test. Go through the question carefully. You should not just start writing stuff after seeing the word tobacco. The topic specifically states that tobacco is bad, and the real question is whether the government should legislate against its consumption. In simpler words, should the decisions on smoking be made by the government or the individuals? Students often make 2 mistakes on this topic. Sometimes they focus on why tobacco is bad, and some other times they decide to talk about what the government or the individuals can do to prevent smoking. These are common topics when discussing tobacco as well, but they are not what the question asks for. This question is actually much less about tobacco than you think it is. It is more about who possesses the liberty to make such a decision. Not all questions are as philosophical as this one, but it serves as a good reminder for you to pay attention to what the prompt is actually about. So you go through the question very carefully. I would suggest spending at most half a minute on this step. Next would be the brainstorming. Firstly, you should pick an opinion. All questions ask for an opinion, be it to choose among some options, to pick a side, or to decide the best option for a situation. Then you should try to find 2 logical and relevant arguments. Why 2, you might ask? Doesn't matter how you want to approach this question, it is almost always suggested to go with 4 paragraphs. If you have fewer than 4, then your body will probably be insufficient for arguments, or you are sacrificing the intro or the conclusion. If you want to have more, which is actually what I learned in high school with 5 paragraphs, the word count limits your ability to elaborate within each paragraph, so a total of 4 paragraphs is quite a nice middle ground. Here comes another tip. Do not actually go with your true opinion if it is difficult to articulate. Nobody is doing fact checks on your essay to see if you truly think what you write. In the case of the 3 examples, I like both cats and dogs, but for the sake of simplicity, I will choose one side to answer the question. And which side I choose largely depends on what easy arguments I can come up first. Usually I will go with cats simply because I can find simpler arguments for cats. Sure, you can argue that dogs are better companions and whatnot, but it just seems more troublesome in comparison if you instead talk about how cats are less destructive and you don't have to walk them. Stick to the easy arguments, even though you might not actually agree with them. This will save you a ton of trouble. If you find yourself brainstorming for too much time, it probably means you have difficulty to fully explain the side you chose. My advice, switch to a different side ASAP. Let's use the capital punishment question as an example. I personally don't agree with death penalties, and I have a lot of legitimate reasons. You might falsely execute an innocent person, and morally it just doesn't seem right. Stop here and give these arguments a try to see if you can write something decent. It's very difficult. Therefore, if I were to answer this question during the test, I would gladly say, yes, I do support death penalties because it's cheaper than keeping people in prison, and it can scare people away from committing more crime. These two seem like very good arguments and they are very logical, but can you tell without searching for the numbers that they are actually both false? Averagely speaking, it's more expensive to execute a criminal than a life sentence, and it doesn't actually deter people from crimes. Again, who's fact-checking during the test? If you can use these 2 arguments and simplify your writing, then that's all I care about. Same goes for the public versus private school. I have attended both public and private schools in my life, and I can see the merits of both systems. Private schools are usually more well-equipped with teaching staff and other resources, and generally they are safer than public schools, either because of the community or just better security. On the other hand, public schools are usually cheaper, and you get to meet a lot more people because of their accessibility. Guess which side I'm gonna pick? Of course it's the public schools. We just talked about how death penalties can save money, so obviously saving money by going to public schools makes total sense. This makes me sound like a psychopath, but I aced the test, so you decide if you want to be politically correct and waste your time on forming other arguments. So far, we have the following. We understand the question, we have chosen 1 opinion and 2 supporting arguments. This basically concludes the brainstorming part. Then comes the actual writing. Whichever method you decide to go with, remember that you should leave out a few minutes at the end to check your grammar, spelling, and maybe do a little revision. It's no guarantee that you will get full scores on grammar and spelling even if you spend a lot of time on checking, but it's a good habit that you should have regardless if you're taking the test or writing something else. Then, what methods do you have? This officially enters the freestyle territory. You have so many different ways to write this essay. You can choose to follow a template, and believe me when I say there are hundreds of different versions. What they don't always tell you is what the templates were designed to achieve. Some of them are for scoring 50s, some for 65s, and some allegedly can score students a 79. Based on my experience, most students who do score 79 in writing usually have a few tricks up their sleeves, meaning they don't always follow the templates word for word. Here comes another suggestion. If you decide to go with a template, first make some changes to it. The template might have some weak phrasing like, for example, why not change it to for illustration purposes? Some of them begin the last paragraph with in conclusion, but maybe you prefer given the aforementioned arguments. You make changes for the same reasons as you would not follow the templates for retail lecture. You can avoid any potential risk of being flagged as cheating, and you can improve a great deal on top of what templates can give you. The second would be to add a few sentences. Many templates have only one sentence in the conclusion paragraph. This is not ideal in practice because all paragraphs should be elaborated and developed over multiple sentences. Sometimes the body paragraphs might only have 3 sentences, which, in my experience, are not enough to fully expand an argument. You can go with 3 sentences if there isn't much to talk about, but if you feel there's more to be discussed, don't be afraid to insert extra sentences into the template. The third tip is to practice normal writing. This is oftentimes neglected by students who think templates can do it all. This is simply not the case. At its best, a template for the essay provides a general structure for you to follow, and it gives you somewhere around half of the required word count. You still need to come up with the other half yourself, hence the importance of practice. Just memorizing the template will never be enough, so be prepared to spend some time on actually writing stuff. I'll use 2 of my students to demonstrate how different your strategies can be, so long as you meet the requirements of the scoring categories. For the first student, he strictly follows a template, but he made some changes to it. He removed the sentence in the template that talks about an example, and he will go with, a research conducted by blah 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 suggests that blah blah blah, and he will randomly make up some numbers. He likes to go different ways for his body paragraphs, so he will talk about both advantages and disadvantages for the side he picks. For the conclusion, he would say that he doesn't have a preferred choice and further research is needed to make the best decisions. His essays would crumble under some scrutiny, but for the sake of scoring high for the test, it absolutely works. He has impeccable grammar, and the template he modified has some complex but ubiquitous structures. Here is how the second student does it. She prefers more of a freestyle, so for her first paragraph, she would use 3 to 4 sentences to introduce a grand scheme, and then narrow down to the specific topic. For her first body paragraph, she would do something quite normal, giving an argument and doing some elaboration. For her third paragraph, however, she does it like nobody else. She would give a counter-argument against the side she chose, and then she would debunk that counter-argument. This is her way of showing development and logic, which was something that surprised me when I first saw it. It doesn't matter in the end because her choice of vocabulary was on point, and she delivers very relevant and sophisticated arguments. She also likes to have a few more sentences in the conclusion to do a wrap-up. Even though she doesn't use a template, she has her own unique way of addressing the question and expressing her capabilities. And guess what? This is how she writes every essay. This is precisely her own template. I hope that these 2 success stories can be your inspiration on how you can answer this question type. Let this be an affirmation for you to retain your writing habits. You don't need to strictly follow another style to score high. You might need to improve upon your current habits, like using fancier vocabulary or fixing grammatical errors. But this is definitely nicer than memorizing some template that someone else designed with unfamiliar or mediocre phrasing. You can definitely do better than that. Now, what method would I choose to use? There is a general structure to follow, and this is how I like to summarize it. The first paragraph is the introduction, and you might consider adding a few more sentences to ease into the topic from a larger scope. The last sentence, which is commonly known as the thesis, should be your chosen opinion. The second paragraph should be about your first argument, and the very first sentence should address that. Later, depending on how you like to do it, I recommend 1 to 2 sentences for elaboration. They can be examples, further discussions, depicting a scenario, using hyperbole, whatever you like. Then you would repeat this process for the third paragraph, and this time it would be about your second argument. Lastly, for the conclusion, not only do you rephrase the thesis, you can also have some further discussion on the grand scheme. However you want to write this essay, with a template or not, it will always follow this general process. The rest is on you to design a piece of writing with content and correctness, and maybe a little flashy stuff thrown in there. Damn, I feel like spending 20 minutes on the essay and getting us nowhere. This question type is particularly difficult to generalize, so the best way will be looking at some actual writing and to see how they can be improved in the respective areas. I have a very unique way of grading essays, and it has some variation depending on what score my students are going after. This will be the main way for us to have further discussions on the essay. I'll be recording my grading process and use real examples to demonstrate writing techniques, so we will skip the walkthrough episode for now and jump straight into reading. That'll be all for today. Hope this has been insightful to you guys. Please like, subscribe, and share, and feel free to send me some sample writing so we can tailor the discussion to your exact needs. For now, let's not be so toxic on Twitter that Taylor Swift made an exception and started commenting on politics, and I'll see you all next time.